Tonight's meeting is about a serious social justice issue in Santa Clara County. It's one where we can make a difference because we are within that window of time when the county is getting input on how to move forward. And when I learned about this from Jen, who is now at SURJ, new at SURJ and leading SURJ's effort, I cornered her and said, would you present that for WILPF? She's a yes woman. So here we are tonight. And we have two experienced SURJ leaders to present this tonight. We have Megan Swift, and Megan has been with SURJ for 5 years. And what motivates Megan to be part of what's going on in SURJ is her realization of how much she has benefited from the system. She's a mom and she wants to make sure we take care of everybody. So she's part of SURJ. Lauren Renaud has been with SURJ for 4 years or so. And this was an opportunity because this is something where you can make a concrete difference. So here tonight with our look at how racism has impacted the criminal legal system. Welcome, Megan and Lauren.
Hello.
Thank you. We also have Tal here who's running tech for us. So she's going to be behind the scenes though. So, well, that was an amazing intro. Thank you very much.
Really fantastic. Okay. Hi, everybody. Good evening. My name is Lauren. I'm a member of Showing Up for Racial Justice, and SURJ believes it's essential to gather in community, whatever shape that is taking right now. It was on Zoom a lot recently. And we like to connect with other folks close to us around anti-racist political education. So this curriculum that we're going to go through was developed by SURJ members following the lead of many local organizations, including Silicon Valley Debug, Californians United for a Responsible Budget, or CURB, Critical Resistance, White People for Black Lives, as well as sociologist Mari Tapia. And these organizations have been guided by many other organizations, including but not limited to Angela Davis, Ruth Wilson Gilmore, Marianne Kaba, who have been fighting for abolition and justice reform for decades. The SURJers who are facilitating tonight, we don't claim to be experts in this, and we really want to reference and credit everyone whose work that we're grateful for. And we can share some more resources after the presentation if you'd like. So these are some community agreements that we've found helpful for some of these meetings, and we like to talk about making this a brave space for discussion and learning. And so I'll read off the screen just to make it easier. So speak from your experience and truth, don't speak on behalf of others. It's okay to make mistakes, for you're learning together. We try to call folks in instead of calling out, and it is always good to ask if you don't know. I'll just pause for a second. Does anyone have anything you want to add, or any other agreements that you've all used in the past? Sounds good. So I'll give you a little, what are we doing tonight? So we're going to have an introduction. We're going to do a little bit of the history of policing and incarceration in the US. We will take a break, which is great. We will, you can't just go straight in this for the whole time. We'll talk about what it means to envision a better future, and then we'll get local. We'll talk about what's going on in Santa Clara County right now and invite you to take action. I will pass it over to Megan, who will get us into this history bit.
All right, thank you. So we're all here for a reason, and we're talking about not just the jail in San Jose, but incarceration in general. So we have to ask ourselves, how did we get here? And this is really where we challenge people's mythology of police, especially white people's mythology of police. For us to understand the power and devastating impact of police and prisons today, we have to look at the long and inhumane history. You can trace the lineage of prisons and police back to slavery and even before. These systems are inextricably linked and have direct ties to the atrocities and violence that we see today. But I want you to remember and just really think about this as we go through the slides and through our talk. There was a time before police and prisons, and there can be a time without police and prisons again. I want to say up front in the next couple slides, we're going to be going over about 400 years of just terrifying history, and we're going to do it in minutes. We won't be able to talk about all the details or expand on many of the important events that we do bring up. This really is just a bare bones of policing history. I really encourage you to dig deeper on your own. And if you want, we'll stay behind if you want to have a conversation to talk about your reactions or ask other questions that we can maybe answer or give you additional resources if that's what you want. So, we're going to skip.
Yep. No,
That's
sorry.
Okay. Right. We're trying to be mindful of your Friday nights. So this slide, these next series of slides, I just want to say again, they're edited from the work of Mari Tapia. She's the sociology professor at De Anza College, and I just really want to give her credit for the amazing work that she's done in researching these and pulling the information together. So let's start with slavery. From 1619 to 1865, for around 250 years, slavery fueled the American economy. By 1860, slavery was a $3.5 billion industry. Enslaved people were the largest single financial asset in the US economy. And because of that, many of the slave owners feared enslaved people, the owners feared rebellions. And this is when patrols of white men developed as one of the earliest and most prolific forms of policing in the US. It was their job to control the movements and behaviors of enslaved Black people through dehumanization, torture, kidnapping, rape, and just all kinds of violent acts. Enslaved people were seen as property, and the role of the police at that time was to protect white property. Policing of Black bodies was seen as the role of a good citizen. This takes us to the next part of our history. So next slide. The American Revolution, 1765 to 1783. This period established security for white male landowners who only made up 15% of the population. And this was at the expense of the other 85% of the population through indigenous genocide, African slavery, and denying political rights to poor whites and also women. Our prison system back then was modeled off the English workhouse, in which imprisonment and forced labor, they went hand in hand. It was seen as a cure for the idleness of poor. So both policing and incarceration are rooted in white financial elites controlling Black people and poor people. When we move on to the post-Civil War, here we're looking at the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, claiming to end slavery. However, there was a really big loophole under which slave labor could continue as a punishment for crime. This created an incentive for whites in power to arrest Black people and put them in jails and prisons to exploit their labor and to prevent their entry into waged labor or gaining any political power. The Southern economy was built on stolen labor, and it was collapsing. New laws forced now free Black people to work for their former captors by requiring them to enter annual binding employment contracts. So the white corporate economy used near free prison labor with convict leasing programs. And this is where prisoners were forced to work at private plantations, coal mines, railroad yards, just anywhere that they were wanted, they were forced to work there, and it was not easy work. Convicts at this time were far cheaper to obtain than enslaved people were before emancipation. So clearly at this time, we're seeing slavery has taken on another form. And today we see versions of this in the use of prison labor to produce a variety of industrial and agricultural products. We're having incarcerated people fight fires. I don't know if you know this or not. Inmate firefighters are paid $2 to $5 a day. They get $1 more an hour while they're actively fighting a fire. So we're still doing it. That's the 13th Amendment. Emancipation was followed by Black codes, and these were laws created to restrict Black people's freedoms. They were designed to re-enslave the Black community for like harmless everyday actions like owning property or being absent from work or selling produce inside town limits, swearing, walking without a purpose, or at night. Even talking loudly in the presence of a white woman or hunting on Sundays was reason enough to be incarcerated. So we can view these laws as the criminalization of Blackness itself. And once again, I just really try to have this sink in that racism isn't a bug in our criminal system. It's a feature. It was designed with purpose and we use it. So during the progressive era, this goes into the 1920s. The span of policing broadens. We start to see parole and probation systems being formed. And really what this does is it expands the role of state surveillance. In the 1920s, federal policing and surveillance activities were used to break progressive movements like multiracial unions. They were meant to break civil rights actions. They were meant to control pacifists. They were used to control feminist organizations. State police agencies, they were created to squash unions and organized labor and strikes. And the state did this working with corporations because the corporations didn't want to bear the expense of breaking the unions themselves. So by the 1930s, every state has some form of state police agency. That's the state police. It was completely created to bust unions. So that's the state working to control wealth, white wealth. So we move on to the Jim Crow laws and segregation. Well, this made it illegal for Black people to try and operate as white people do in the public sphere. It prevented social advancement. It prevented access to wealth. Incarceration and police violence were tools used by the police when Black people dared to challenge racist laws. And you'll see that during this time, the police departments actively collaborated with the Ku Klux Klan to terrorize Black people. They worked in unison. Now, during the era of civil rights, we're talking 1954 to 1968, various police agencies like the FBI and SWAT teams, they were established with expanded crime-fighting responsibilities and power. And so it's in the mid-20th century that we see police trying to professionalize their organizations, their institutions. And it's an effort to hide their overt roots in slavery and anti-labor practices. Yet, while they're trying to professionalize in secret, police agencies are continuing to undermine progressivism. So COINTELPRO is an FBI program, and it was created to actively monitor and target Black liberatory groups, disrupting civil rights movements and Black power activities for 2 decades. The Black Panther Party at this time was seen as the greatest internal threat to the country by the FBI. And this was simply for trying to create a cooperative security system for the Black community. And COINTELPRO sought to dismantle this movement for justice. And they did it through incarcerating key leaders and assassinating key leaders. And we're, locally, we're all too aware of that history. When we move on, we kind of look at contemporary policing. I know we've just gone like 300 years, right? That's a lot. But contemporary policing has led to mass incarceration, which is where we are now. So in 1970, the US prison population was about 350,000 people. And throughout the 20th century, you just have to really keep this in mind. The prison population in the United States was largely consistent. It really didn't fluctuate that much through the mid 20th century. But this starts to change in the 70s. The population begins to grow. And this is due to a backlash to the civil rights wins that were made in the 1960s. So just really think about that. In 1970, the prison population was $350,000 or 350,000 people. I apologize. Well, what happened around then? It's when we started the war on drugs and racial profiling. And in the 70s, that really began to establish mass incarceration in the US. So by 1990, the US population was over 1.1 million people. So the number of people in prison had increased fivefold since the 1970s, 2 decades, a fivefold increase. The $300 billion 1994 crime bill allowed for a massive expansion for the prison system, and it provided law enforcement not only with money, but incentives to make as many drug arrests as possible. So even though studies show Black and white Americans use and sell drugs at similar rates, Black Americans are far more likely to be arrested, prosecuted, and incarcerated for drug crimes. So where are we today? By the year 2000, the US prison population has reached more than 2 million people. And today, 2.3 million people are behind bars. The US has the highest rate of incarceration in the world. We're 5% of the world or global population. We are 25% of the prison population. If prison worked, we'd be the safest country in the world. 77 million people have criminal records now. And this affects your ability to get a job, housing, education, even your right to vote. And what we've seen recently is police has become more militarized, especially after 9/11, and have widely increased their surveillance tactics. And they're equipped with military-grade weapons, which they use on US citizens. A good example is most recently the intersection of policing with overt white nationalism. 35 Capitol police officers were under investigation for participating in the Capitol insurrection. And they just released this week that that investigation resulted in disciplinary action for 6 officers. So, and with all that bad news, we have to remember there was a time before police in prisons, and there will be a time after. And I just want to tell you that, people keep talking about reforming police. Why can't we reform police or just build a state-of-the-art jail or just offer better programming inside those jails? Well, the key point to keep in mind as we reviewed this history and go forward is that there was no time of innocence when it came to policing and mass incarceration. The very existence of policing as an institution is rooted in white supremacy and racial capitalism. Racism in policing and incarceration is not about bad apples because it's baked into the system. It is not a bug, it's a feature. So that's a lot to go through. Do you want to take a second? Does anybody have any questions? Well, maybe this would be a good way to start some conversation. We were going to do a Zoom slide or a Zoom poll. Is that all set up? This is a lot to process, and it can feel very overwhelming, even abstract. So to bring us a little bit closer to the reality of what we've been discussing, we're going to ask everybody to participate in an anonymous poll about our personal experiences with police and incarceration. We'll know how many people answer yes or no, but it's completely anonymous. It's not tied to a name, and that will never be known. All right. So just take a second to look over the questions and answer them however you can. So, have you ever called for police assistance, not because of a crash? So 63% of us have said yes, and 38% have said no. And that just shows that there's a certain comfort or trust that the police are there to assist you, and that reflects on, your experience with them throughout your life. Have you seen police called to a mental health crisis? 63% of us have said yes, and 38% have said no. I think that's a really interesting point. We do call the police for mental health issues, and how are they equipped to handle them? Police are often called to mental health crises, despite being conditioned to view a person acting strangely as a dangerous threat rather than somebody who's in need of help. But we're left asking, who else can we call? We trust that they're going to take care of, but really what we're doing is we're putting them in a person who's in crisis in a situation where they're viewed as dangerous, not in need of service. Have you ever been arrested? 25% of us have said yes, and 75%.
And I would bump that up by one.
Okay, so that's really interesting too. I'd be curious. Some of us have direct experience with incarceration. Juvenile detention is a very common way. We see a prison school nexus. We see a lot of children who are caught up in the juvenile system who typically have committed non-violent offenses, such as breaking curfew or skipping school, ending up getting into the prison pipeline. I don't know, Lauren, how do you want to handle this question? I was arrested on the George Floyd. I got beat by the police and I got arrested. And, it was crazy. I don't know who else was out there that time, but that I've already been active in Care First, Jail Last, but it really solidified a lot of feelings.
Yeah.
So, but even as I was going through that, I knew I was okay. I knew people were going to know where I was. I knew that I was going to be fine. It was never my life I feared for. It was the people who were behind me that I feared for. So, Lauren. Oh, I thought what about you, Reverend Rowan?
I've been arrested at basically every nuke plant in the US during the 70s.
Nice.
and I spent no more than a week, I don't think, in jail or prison after those arrests. But I've been talking to people at Line 3, and they're damaging people's health when they're arresting them. And so it is a really different climate today than it was being arrested in the 70s.
Oh, yeah. Well, if you follow local happenings with the jail, I mean, many of the incarcerated people went on a 6-day hunger strike. And that was, they literally had to stop eating and put their entire body at risk to get the word out that the conditions were so dire. Question number 5, I think, is always interesting because have you ever gotten away with a crime that you could have been punished by incarceration? And think about shoplifting, think about recreational drug use, think about possession, possibly underage drinking, helping an underage friend or sibling get alcohol, stealing from work, not just Post-its, driving while under the influence. So we
about
have-
driving while black.
Yeah, well, that's not against the law, you know, but does
Well,
it
that
show
doesn't
the
mean you don't
difference?
get arrested or killed.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly right. But 63% of us have done it, yet only 25% of us have been arrested. So that shows that, you know, privilege really is at work. And then I think this is really interesting. Most of us were in our late teens through early 20s before we really interacted with police. And I think that's a really interesting point to make, that we already live in a police-free world. You know, we have to invite the police into where we live, whereas other communities are overly impacted by over-policing. So, and then, you know, how do your personal encounters or experiences with police shape how you feel about them? You know, 63% of us have had positive encounters with them. Wouldn't it be nice if everybody had that, you know? And I think that's very telling. So I think we're going to do breakout groups, and we're going to just split us in half. Is that it, Tal? I'm sorry. I'm just going to say, like, we're going to spend a couple minutes talking about just reflecting on these results, and just think about these questions. How do you feel about these results? Did any of them surprise you? And what questions does this bring up for you? I'm really curious to hear.
Welcome back. Welcome back.
All right.
Megan, you want slides back, or you have anything before we go to slides?
No, I think my group and I really want to put it out there to everybody that, you know, these are thoughtful, insightful comments and ideas and experiences that people shared. And I found it to be very meaningful and appreciate it, because this is something new. So thank you. Thank you again to my group. So everybody, let's take a deep breath. That was a lot to go through. And like, here's the good part, you know, here's where we can imagine something different. And that's what we're going to do right now. So we can see that we've learned from our criminal legal system, it falls short. Reform isn't going to fix this. And if racism isn't a bug, but a feature of the system, then we really need to dream a lot bigger. And I find that this helps people kind of rethink their assumptions about policing. And it's a creative way to have people imagine a different way to make our communities safe and also work. So I have two quotes here. Can somebody read the first one in blue, the top one?
The first one says, we have to create a vision that's much bigger than the one we have now. And this is from Patrice Khan-Colors, one of the co-founders of Black Lives Matter.
Okay, now see, you should have volunteered for the first one, because the second one's a little longer. Who wants to read the second one to us?
We are bending the future together into something we have never experienced. A world where everyone experiences abundance, access, pleasure, human rights, dignity, freedom, transformative justice, peace. We long for this.
Mm-hmm.
We believe it is possible. Adrienne Marie Brown.
And I do. I believe it is possible. So, and that's the best part, because if we can believe it, we can make it. And what we want to do is we want to follow these thinkers. We want to create a vision. We want to bend the future. And that's what we're going to try right now. So right here are two great books. If you're going to stay seated, great things to read. So, but I'm going to put us on break and come back in 5 minutes. Is that okay?
Hi, Shirley.
And he covers all those places and how they talk about or don't racism. And it's really an interesting read if you've ever been to any of those places. It's like, what did I miss? I went to Monticello. I went to Mount Vernon. Boy, did I need to go back. Anyway, I highly recommend it.
It's really interesting, like some of the historical places that are changing how they present things. Absolutely. Okay, I think that was 5 minutes. Are we good to go back
How
in?
they talk about racism and how they don't talk. about
Don't,
racism.
exactly, exactly. This is just a nice old house that some people used to live at, you know? So we're going to follow on what Megan was just sharing and start talking about visioning a new future. So I'm going to jump through these a little bit. Here, these were made by an artist who's affiliated with Conflict Transformation. There's a whole series of these picturing what alternatives to police and incarceration might look like. So the first one says, you're experiencing intimate partner violence. Imagine texting a number and a trauma-informed crisis intervention specialist meets you in a safe place. An hour later, you are working together to make a plan that will keep you safe long-term. Isn't that public safety? The next one says, you are experiencing a mental health crisis and afraid. Imagine you call 311 and a first responder trained in mental health comes to your door. 1 hour later, you are in a safe place with your consent and with plans for follow-up care. Isn't that public safety? Your friends are intoxicated and fighting, but you don't want to get them in trouble. Imagine you call 311 and a crisis intervention team comes to your door. An hour later, your friends are sleeping it off at home and not in jail. Isn't that public safety? How does this feel, feeling and thinking of what something that could look different from what we have today? And we're trying to not be limited to the options that we see today.
So I have a personal experience with these situations. So when my daughter was 10, we were going through a huge custody battle forever. And she was homesick, and I had let her father know that she was homesick, and he came to the door, and I let him in because I thought, oh, he'll just like sit with her for a little bit, blah, blah, blah. He tried to kidnap her out of her room. So I had to call the police. So 4 policemen came in 4 different police cars, and 2 of them, 2 armed policemen went into my daughter's room to take her temperature. And to this day, that still like upsets me, right? And, if I didn't live in Willow Glen, if we weren't white, my ex-husband would have been arrested. Instead he was just told, I will arrest you for child abuse if you want to continue this attitude. But, to this day, and I was saying, my daughter, luckily or not, she never was afraid of the police. So she was kind of okay with, she wasn't afraid of them coming in her room, but it just horrified me that 2 armed policemen, instead of a social worker or a county official or, a case manager, came to our house and said, dude, she's sick, leave her alone. Right. I mean, and it, there was a whole situation. And I mean, literally to this day, and, that was 12 years ago, it still makes me want to throw up that this happened. So that's, I think it could have been handled differently. That goes to one of these examples here.
I really appreciate you. Thank you for sharing that. That's a hard story, and you're absolutely right. I wish we had more options, and it wasn't, calling the police or nothing, right? And that's part of what I want to talk about. So thank you for sharing that. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I did call 311. The lawyer told me to call the police because I called the lawyer first, right? And then the lawyer said, call the police. I called 311. They said, no, this is 911. I mean, it was like, it's just really,
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Okay. So I'm going to walk us through a little exercise. If you have any paper or pencil, like if you're the type of person who likes to journal or doodle, this would be a good time. If you don't want to, that's okay. So I want to think today, and this is a perfect example that you just shared, but what's wrong with what we have in our current criminal justice or injustice system? And we want to ask folks to just share something in the chat on what comes to mind and what's wrong with our current system.
So no alternative to police when you want help. 1 in 5 disabled persons have had an encounter with police. They bring guns to every call, no matter what. It's militarized, it's lethal, it's racist. Those are some of the responses people are sharing in the chat. Thank you.
So now we want to imagine, in order to imagine the reality we want, we have to throw out what we have right now, right? What if in the total opposite, like what is the opposite of what everyone just described in the chat? It doesn't have to, you don't have to know how it would happen or if it's feasible, just what would the true opposite of that be? And you can either share that in the chat or out loud.
Many options for who to call for help, not just officers with guns. I'd like to know what number to call, and they would help me figure out what resources were available. That would be great. The problem is overreaction from the police. So a measured response. No more helicopters and tanks, the demilitarization of our police force. That's what we say about the jail. If you build it, they'll fill it. And with the police, if they buy it, they'll use it. So
I'd like to have more community action, like, neighbors helping neighbors, instead of even calling an authority. It's like, so-and-so's here, can you help me? And, it be more community organized and not, I don't know how that would work, but that's how I would see it, like people taking care of people. Community-based
resources. Yeah.
My observation also having been from Willow Glen, Cecilia, is, and I mean, this isn't living in Willow Glen, but building on that, like community takes a little bit of effort, right? And you actually have to meet your neighbor and you have to know who they are. And it's like easier, quote unquote, to just give this authority to somebody else, but it has all this collateral damage.
The street I live on, it's really, I have that neighborhood, I have that street, and when this happened, neighbors did come to make sure that we were okay, and I have I tell the story, my car wasn't working and my neighbor looked up on the internet what was wrong and he fixed it, and it's just, that's just kind of the neighborhood that I live in. And so that's why I can imagine that, but it does take a lot of work, a lot of time to get to that place. And oddly, I think our neighborhood is the way that it is because a lot of our kids were the same ages at the same time. So we had that built-in carpool community block party kind of thing. So
absolutely.
Oh, this is Shirley.
And here's the ironic thing. I grew up in Willow Glen. My parents live in Willow Glen. I went to, books in Markham, Willow Glen High School. So I know people. And I always thought Willow Glen was this idyllic community until I got on the Willow Glen neighborhood mailing list. And I'm like, where did all these racist assholes come from? Sorry, you can edit that out.
Cecilia, I know that.
Yeah.
Next door is like that too. The recent recall election, boy, were there a lot of people who were going to vote yes on that. So
I think that ties into what you were saying. It's the anonymity of it, that when you are face to face or who that person is, I think those community connections hopefully temper that. So Essie had a great option too, which is to stop the privatization of prisons. There's financial incentives to building and filling them. So Essie, that was a really good remark to make. So.
Go ahead, Megan.
Oh gosh. All right. Make it jump where we were.
I'll jump in if you want.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is, we want to zoom out from the big picture to local, right? We talked about that whole 400 years of history and trying to imagine something different. We want to kind of zoom in a little bit. So this is the current situation in Santa Clara County. There is a main jail complex. There is Elmwood Correctional Facility. And there's juvenile hall. Actually, now that I'm looking at this, I feel like something was updated recently, and I think the juvenile hall might be empty now. But this is basically what's going on in Santa Clara County.
It is empty. There's today's documents had 0 to 18-year-olds.
So that's some progress. there are not juveniles in jail in Santa Clara County right now. We can lower incarceration. It is possible. So, you know, we want to just give a little bit of this context that there are over 2,000 people in our jail, and the vast majority of them are awaiting trial. They are in there because they did not have the bail money to get out. We were talking about this earlier, right? We are putting, if you are poor, we will lock you up and for a very long time. And if you are rich, you can get out. You know, this is, it's yes, people are being locked up for a long time who have not been sentenced. Go ahead, Megan.
Yeah, no, actually, I updated the numbers. There are 2,393 adults being held in Santa Clara County jails. As of September 17th today, only 10% have been formally sentenced. 90% have not been convicted of anything. They're awaiting trial. So to add to that, 50% of the inmates in the country, or sorry, in the county right now, are people who have serious mental illness. And for female inmates, it's 80%. 80% of those women who are being held have mental health diagnoses. When you look at the general population, we're only 5% of the general population in our country have serious mental illness. And mental health consumers are the most overrepresented group in the jail. And there are over 1,000 people right now in our jails with serious mental illness. That's 5 times the number of treatment beds that there are in this county in total. They don't need jail, they need benefits, supportive services, they need beds and understanding. So, I mean, we're really just have a high number of incarcerated people that we're using jail instead of mental health care. Sorry, Paula, you have your hand raised.
This is Shirley. I have a question. I have a comment.
Oh.
And do they get any mental health services in jail?
Yes and no.
Yeah. I mean, I've spoken with a psychiatrist who works in the prisons, not the jails. They get medication. You know, they don't get therapy, they don't get, and the problem is that when they're in jail, usually they're isolated and they deteriorate just rapidly to the point where medication really doesn't end. I mean, not aware of who they are, where they are, you know, just no, they don't.
There's a saying that you can't get well in a cell, right? And like, even if you, let's say, you know, offer therapy and medication, but somebody's autonomy is being taken away, they don't have control over their day-to-day activity, you know, that's going to exacerbate any underlying conditions and creates conditions in people who do not go, like people come out of jail worse than they went in, even folks who did not go in with mental health conditions.
This is Shirley. I used to work at the county hospital, so I'm pretty familiar with the way it works. There are psychiatric units that do intake of people that the police bring in. And the police bring in people who have, you know, mental health issues or mental illness. The problem is there's just not enough room for a lot of these people. So they end up on the street after 24 hours. They might be observed and, you know, they might be given medication, but there's usually not a whole lot of room for them. So unless they're violent, they often end up on the street again within a short time after the police bring them in. I used to volunteer in the psychiatric unit as a chaplain, and they seem to be doing well. The prisoners or the, I guess they're not prisoners at that point, but the people who are brought in, not always, sometimes they're self-committed or the family brings them in. But, you know, I do think they are helped, but I don't think that the services are adequate for the number of, I mean, 1,000 people. That psychiatric unit isn't that big.
No, they're not in, they're in jail. They're not in psychiatric units. There's like, what, 4 or 5 beds at the jail for psychiatric observation. So, I mean, I'm glad you had that positive experience, but the whole catalyst was Michael Tyrese, who was in a mental crisis and beat to death with 3 correctional officers. And then we talk about the $10 million settlement that we just learned from the sheriff department, where an individual was having a psychotic break and they watched him beat his head against a metal cage until he has irreversible, he did brain damage. He injured himself so severely that he's much more incapacitated than he was before. And they stood there and they watched him. The psychiatrist watched him. The intervention team watched him. They said, we can't go in until we have our hazmat on. So they left, worked to get their hazmat on, so.
Slowly, huh?
Yeah, $10 million. They have an operating budget of $47 million a year. That was a $10 million payout that has nothing to do with that operating budget. So these are the stories that we hear today about incarcerated people and the mental health care that they're getting, real time. But Michael Tyrese was an individual with a mental illness, and he really was the catalyst that made us say, like, we're not doing this right, So I'm glad that your experience with the psychiatric wards was different, but
I wouldn't say it's that ideal. I mean,
no, it's never ideal.
No, I mean, but it's better. It's better than being in jail where they really just ignore your condition.
Yeah,
and they do try to treat with medication and other interventions for these prisoners, and but they can't. They're not able to deal with that many people.
Yeah. Well, wouldn't it be nice to get mental health care without getting incarcerated?
You know, that 311 number that was mentioned, I looked at the list and it's like abandoned pets.
It doesn't exist.
I mean, the reason you call the 311 number is because somebody threw trash on your property, or you have a lost pet, or it has these are really domestic nuisance kind of issues. Yeah. It doesn't deal at all with any mental illness issues or people who have very, shouldn't be on the street or are harming themselves. So it's not, 311 is not, it's not supposed to be used in that way.
No, to be clear, those are like in some future scenario where the county is staffed up with tons of, health, social workers and all of that. Yeah, sure.
Because I mean, you got to compete with those lost pets and that trash in your yard.
We need an agency to connect that number to. In Oakland, they have a team that works from 8 at night till 8 in the morning, Friday and Saturdays, for people in mental health crises. Gosh, I just wish we had that here. It would be a start. But yeah, like Lauren said, that was an example. Lauren, do you want to take this slide?
I'm going to take you on that was everything that's happening currently that's terrible. So I'm going to give you a little bit of optimism. In 2020, for the end of 2020, a coalition was formed by Silicon Valley DBUG called the Care First Jails Last Coalition. There's an opportunity, I'll go into detail about why there's an opportunity right now, but there's an opportunity to not build a jail and instead get the county to invest in alternatives. So there's 3 principles of the coalition, and this is that we are stopping the jail. We need to create non-carceral alternatives to the root issues that fuel incarceration. So that means non-locked. So if there's a mental health facility, we would like to see a not locked mental health facility. And we center the experiences of leadership of those who are incarcerated, formerly incarcerated, and their families and loved ones. So we actually just touched on a lot of this. This is kind of a quick summary of what's been happening in Santa Clara County in the past. Michael Tyree was murdered in his cell. This led to hunger strikes and to consent decrees that resulted in a blue ribbon commission that said the jail conditions were inhumane. They came up with 600 different things that were wrong with the jail, and they managed to condense that down to about 80. The court ordered them to comply with the consent decrees, and the Board of Supervisors thought the best way to do that was to just build a new jail, right? Like to build a new jail that that complies with the consent decree. And we think you can do that without building a new jail. And then in 2020, there were 2 jails in the main jail complex. One of them was demolished in preparation for this new jail that they were planning. then there was like this window of opportunity where Supervisor Dave Cortese, before he left, made a motion to explore mental health alternatives instead and halted the RFP process. If you've ever, followed city or county and any of that sort of stuff, to actually stop a bureaucratic process that has happened, like requests for proposals, and get them to put the brakes on, that's a big deal to get them to stop doing something they said they were going to do. So in November, the board unanimously voted to pause the construction process and instead study community alternatives. There's starting in kind of between January and the summer, there was a whole process of building a community process, and that involved finding these outside consultants who held some community input sessions, they did focus groups, and they did a county-wide survey. And also during all this time, the coalition members, which is Debug, SURJ, also the Law Foundation, Bend the Arc, Abolish Stanford, some other groups as well, have been coming to just all the different various county meetings that are related to this in between to keep making sure the issue is top of mind. And in November, so we had this whole multi-month community process going on, and in November, the board will receive a report from the community input process. Based on, there was a preliminary report given in September, and based on that report, we anticipate the report will say, folks do not want a new jail. They want community alternatives. They want mental health services. They want other services that center impacted folks, but that they don't want a new jail. And the question is, what is the board going to do with that report? They're going to receive it, but that doesn't bind them to anything. So basically between now and November, we are trying to find out where all of the supervisors land on this, and and what they need to do, what do they need to move to where we want them to move. And I'll kind of like briefly give this like idea of how SURJ, this is coming from kind of long community organizing principles, but the idea is that folks might have like a particular supervisor, right? They might have ideological resistance. They might just philosophically believe in jails, right? Or they don't believe in decarceration. Or there might be concession costs, like they don't want to look soft on crime. They don't want to look like they were, they didn't act hard enough. And those are kind of, on one side of the seesaw, and we're trying to weigh the other side of the seesaw. So that's either kind of prodding around that ideological resistance, or trying to remove those concession costs and trying to show them actually you will be supported by your constituents if you do this. You will not suffer political consequences. In fact, you will suffer political consequences if you do build a jail.
Right.
So this is like roughly where we're at to get really concrete about Santa Clara County right now. Susan Ellenberg has been leading this whole thing. She does not want to build a new jail. She's been pushing for the community input process. Cindy Chavez and Otto Lee have been really on, Cindy Chavez is really big on reentry network and services for folks who are incarcerated. Otto Lee is pretty big on holding the sheriff accountable, and he was actually originally on that Blue Ribbon Commission that was looking at the conditions that were in the jail. So he knows that the jail as it exists is bad, but the question is, does he think it needs to be replaced with a new facility, or can we get him to believe in a non-carceral option? Wasserman has said, there's going to be a jail, there's going to be a jail, there's going to be a jail. And Samidian is pretty close to that, but not like quite as strong. So, we're trying through community organizing, which means people power, right? This is speaking out at county meetings. This is contacting our representatives. This is maybe an action. That song at the beginning was incredible, and we should have a conversation later about how I can get that song in front of more people. So this is right. This is like how we use people power to get what we want. So I said this. It's between now and November. Like this campaign has at this point been going on. It's going to be almost a year long. And we've been working for, at this point, 10 months to try to get to this point. And we're here. Like, part of me sometimes doesn't believe it. We are now in this 2-month stretch where we actually are just trying to push on this final vote, or to understand what's going to happen next. So there are ways for, I'm gonna get this so close to 8:30. There are ways to get involved. And the one big one is that meeting where they're gonna receive this report and hear from the public on what they think about the report is Tuesday, November 16th. We don't yet know what time the item will be heard, but it will be on the 16th. I say that very confidently, as if the county never changes things. It's possible they'll change them. It's possible they'll change that. But I have the 16th on my calendar. You can email your supervisor, or you can email the jail reform committee. And we have a template, and you can either kind of send a short, brief one, or you can send a longer version. And thank you, Tal is getting all of these links in the chat as we're going. You can send that email now, like you can send that email tonight if you want, and that would be fantastic. There are a number of Board of Supervisor committee meetings over the next 2 months. So there's a committee called the I can't remember it right now, Public Safety and Justice Committee. So they're discussing the jail. There are the regular Board of Supervisor meetings. Also simultaneous to this is a whole other referral to try to reduce incarceration. So there's all these different touch points that we're trying to get at them. And if you want to get more involved, you can either join SURJ or kind of specifically, we have a decarceration issue group that's working on this. And this coming Wednesday, we're having a meeting at 7 p.m. We're going to just at that particular meeting, we're going to be digging really deep into how do we go hold some meetings with those particular supervisors we're trying to target, and how do we find out where they are? How do we break through the political speak, to like really understand where they are, how they might vote, what's important to them, and how we can move them. And Matt King from Sacred Heart is going to be like leading that kind of deep political research action training with us. Yes, and there's also a petition that DBUG has put together, and this is trying to, just kind of give the county a kind of broad sense of the resistance to the jail. That's the push for the next, I'd say, that's the push for the next 2 months. The other thing is getting more people involved and getting more groups involved. So if you know another group that might want to host this house party, we would love to make that happen. If at some point there is like a public sign-on letter, maybe the Raging Grannies would be interested in signing. Maybe another group or a church or a synagogue or anything like that who would be interested. The point is that between now and then, we're trying to show the supervisors that there is wide support for community alternatives to incarceration.
So SURJ, this is where we call this the Tupperware of justice. The SURJ model of fundraising, we raise money not just to cover our costs of organizing. The majority of what we raise goes to our accountability partners. We spoke of them today, 80% of it goes to them. So you heard about DBUG today, who works directly with people who've been harmed by our criminal legal system. The Rapid Response Network is a family accompaniment fund. It helps families who've been affected by a family member who's either been deported or detained by ICE. And then we did our land acknowledgements at the beginning of this meeting. And part of the money that we raise goes to the Amma Mutson Land Trust. And it's one of the ways that we make sure that our land acknowledgement isn't just a hollow gesture. We actually put the money that we raise towards their goals. So Tal's putting a link in there if you feel like supporting SURJ or feel like what we've done is valuable and adds to the community as a whole. We would love it if you would think about donating to us.
We're like, we get a little, we have to leave on an idea of kind of moving forward and what are we going to do. So we invite you to either out loud or in the chat, just share, finish the following sentence. After this, after tonight, I can now imagine blank. What can you imagine now? Go for it.
Start talking or
yeah.
The chat. I can now imagine actually not having a new county jail because all the work that's been done already, and the Board of Supervisors, with only 2 ridiculous guys on there doing the opposition, at least, or there's a chance on the other people.
One of them is my supervisor.
Which one?
Josemidian.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm familiar with his conservative ways.
Oh, boy. Yes.
I feel that the grannies really, the raging grannies have a lot of, I think you don't realize how powerful you could be.
But we had two different groups of people go talk to Joe Semidian at the farmer's market. He had office hours at the Sunnyvale and the Mountain View farmer's market. So we went and talked to him about the jail.
So
This is the end of our presentation, but now we're in, you know, as you're saying, if we were in a physical room right now, right, this would be the time when we like sit around. What'd you think? Do you have any questions? So if anyone needs to leave, go ahead and leave. But we're also happy to, you know, sit here and chat for a little bit.
That, you know, you don't have to be a granny. Still join us in song.
express our appreciation from WILPF to our SURJ sisters. Thank you so much. I learned a lot. So this is applause in sign language, and you can do this too, whatever works, to express your appreciation